I'm with Michael Everall, who is one of my favourite people in cyber. He is the Head of Security Operations and Data Protection Officer for 10x Banking. So we were going to talk about kittens and puppies, but instead we're going to talk about security.
Well, kittens and puppies are much more fluffy and enjoyable, but at the end of the day, they're not, unfortunately, paying my salary.
No, or mine.
Or yours and yours. But some of the points we've been discussing, I would say over the years, but that sounds a long time, but over time.
And I'm only 21, so that's not a thing.
I will go with that because...
Same.
No. What I'm starting to see in the space generally, not just here in the UK, not just Europe, but also I'm starting to see it in Asia Pac and also in the US through various of my contacts over there. We're starting to see, I came into the industry as IT security when it was moving out of the data center onto a 3-tier system, file servers, Novell, if you can remember that far back. Progressively, the security space itself is moving further and further away. We're seeing it now, particularly with the move into cloud space itself, a centralization of controls, but more and more now what we're seeing as well is an understanding that the technology itself is just a wrapper, a tool. Mm-hmm. The controls have to be there, they have to be right, you have to have the degree of control, you have to know what's in, what's out, where it's coming in from, where it's going out to, who's got access. But particularly now with the push with data privacy, we're starting to see people further understanding that it's about the content. At the end of the day, people want to steal information, not because they can, although sometimes they want to, but fundamentally because it's a commodity. It can be bought and sold. Now, obviously with GDPR itself, and we're starting to see even the ICO are starting to put out enforcement notices against companies outside of the UK. There's a Canadian company called AIQ. At the moment, they have an enforcement notice against. We've just seen the French regulator CNIL put a €50 million fine against, is it Facebook or Google or one of the other data suckers?
Yes, yeah, that's a big one against Google recently.
It is. But what we're starting to see now is that requirement for controls is now being seen at a much higher level, much further towards the top of the tree. Now there's also legal and regulatory frameworks, particularly as a data privacy officer, where you have to have that direct connection ability to the highest level of management themselves. But it's not just about security, it's about the content. It always has been about the content now, but personal data. And particularly as people now move to a faster, hopefully smarter, cloud-based infrastructure as well, it's knowing who has access to it, where it's transacting, knowing that you have to have a full, visible and transparent access and knowledge all the way through where your content's going to, who has it, where it's at, what they're doing with it, as well as the progression back to you, because at the end of the day, you still own that responsibility, and no one wants to see either your organization turning up on the front of the Wall Street Journal or the FT, or the regulators coming to you and beating you with a large stick. And it's not just in the UK, not just in Europe. The Singapore, the Personal Data Privacy Act there, it's got teeth and they do use it. We're starting to see, particularly in the US right now, California has already put in place a form of GDPR light for data privacy. Once the Golden State starts to do stuff, there tends to be a push. There's already been at the state level various pieces of requirements controls, New York in particular, Massachusetts, but we're starting to see now a federal push whenever the federal government opens up again. Hopefully it will be at some point before I go over in February. And now there is an understanding that, although you wouldn't believe it when you listen to the Zuckerbergs of this world, personal data belongs to you, to me, to the audience as a whole. It shouldn't be taken just as a commodity to be bought, sold without your control. GDPR gives you more controls around that now. Is it perfect? No. I have issues, for example, around the definition of biometrics, but that's because I'm looking at it from a technology and security and controls perspective, as opposed to from a political perspective, is how it's put together. Having said that, what we're starting to see now, as I said, is this understanding. Content is king. It's what makes an organization actually be able to be an organization, know what's happening about it. In many cases, mapping it against their business processes. It's not just about CRM systems, it's about everything where your customer is engaged.
And do you think customers are interested? Do you think that they understand the value that their data has?
It's very sporadic. There was a note that came out today where I believe it's 160,000 people have called the tax folks here in the UK saying they wanted to have their voice biometrics removed from the taxman system. So people are starting to get this idea that their content, their personal information has value. But people still give it away for free. Obviously, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the social media platforms themselves, they're very important to people. In fact, for a lot of organisations, they're a core embedded portion of their business processes, recruitment in particular.
Absolutely.
But people still give that information away without realising. Now, there is a push, as we know, within GDPR to ensure that this is transparent. There is a legal basis for processing. People have to explicitly give permission. But again, unless there's a better education, people still keep giving their information away without realising what's going to happen. Having said that, I'm starting to see already there's almost a small cottage industry coming up, almost like the old, come to us and we'll get your PPI for you. Now that's petering out. There now seems to be using the same model for come to us and we'll put a class action together and we'll get money from you from Google's, Facebook's, etc. of this world. So where there's money, people will naturally flock to it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunate but true. But I think we're going to be seeing a greater understanding. But it's at a very sporadic piece. We have the generations in the early 20s in particular, and I work in an organisation where I have a huge number of millennials working with me, working incredibly closely, sharp as a tack. They know their stuff. But working with them to say, guys, we can't do that because it's illegal. And sometimes it's an education step as well. They know intellectually, but it's when it has to be bedded down as part of you saying, this is mine. Why should I give it away for free? Now, if the Googles and the Facebooks of this world were required to pay for your content, I think their controls around it would be considerably better than they have been. Of course, that's the libertarian capitalist freak of me coming out. That may actually be a model that happens over time.
We're hearing about this more. Maybe companies are going to pay for your data, pay for that content.
Well, one of the areas there is, particularly for organisations, then they can start to winnow out the high volume, low net worth stuff, actually then start to focus on what is adding value to their business organisation. Obviously, you've got the huge sway, the data oceans that you have with, again, the large social media platforms in particular, where they're using huge amounts of information. They're using that to actually target advertising, etc., which is turning into now a big area they've got to control. But it's also unfortunately leading to still a bit of a Wild West mentality, as in we've got it, we can use it in the way we please. But if you can get to a point where the controls make it valuable to an organisation, they're more likely to actually then use it in a more responsible manner. And if you can actually commoditize your personal product, your personal information, so you have to be rewarded by giving that informed consent, I think you'd see quite a substantial change. Of course, it would actually ruin the business models of a number of them. But hey, we're in a time of the business cycle right now where something like that is probably something that's going to happen. You're seeing companies now with foreign exchange, for example, where they're cutting the middleman of the banks out in effect. You're making money out of it by using their platform. There are ways you can commoditize your content, your information, be it financial, be it personal, and that might well be a model for the mid to longer term, which may then help with an idea of let's get better controls because we understand why my information is valuable. We'll see.
It's something that we're talking about as a security community, but what are the boards, what are the execs actually talking about when it comes to security?
They're still seeing, GDPR is a good one. They see the headlines. They see 2%, they see 4%, they see up to 20 million euro. They see that this could have a direct impact. It also is a point where they're starting to see that this can have personal impact upon themselves, personal liability for themselves. So that focus is higher than it ever has been. But it's from what I've been hearing, it tends to be rather laser focused on this piece of work for GDPR and our controls around it. There's an understanding that it's now third-party risk has to be managed, particularly as you work with partners, but there's a big push now, a lot of organisations are now trying to push fourth-party risk. Where that will end, I hate to think, because it's causing a lot of people a lot of problems. I know I trust you, but who do you trust? It's this web of trust as we go at it. It needs to be more systemized, using things like ISO certifications, SSA 16, ISA 3402, independent verifications of controls. Things like that can give you a greater degree of confidence, SOC 1, SOC 2s, but fundamentally, the issue has to be at the forefront, so it has to be built into all the processes you're doing. Security, data privacy, overarching controls, risk management, vendor risk management. These are all the things which have always been there, but they now have to be more closely embedded than previously they were ever thought to be. And the boards are starting to get this. Budgets, particularly for information security and data privacy, are increasing quite dramatically. There is still a skills shortage, and you could probably talk to that far better than I can.
There really is a skills shortage, yeah.
But it's not so much the numbers of people necessarily want to coming into the industry, but those with the ability to translate tech to business and vice versa. I think that's where more of the gap is. A lot of the security controls, data privacy controls can be commoditized. They can just be buy product X and Y and Z, and putting them together, you will have a good control structure. But unless you bed that into the processes where the people who are delivering, people who are developing, people who are on sales, people who are actually bringing product and revenue into the organization, till they actually also think about it themselves and as part of their business, it's going to be a bit of an uphill struggle. It's always one of those things. The ideal situation for most organizations is going to be, well, we haven't had a problem this week, so we must be good. Hopefully they're slightly more forward-thinking than that, but there is an element. One of the problems, unfortunately, with information security and controls is always, people still use a swan metaphor, all glowing and smooth. They never want to see the legs thrashing vigorously below and the pike that is coming up a la Jaws about to pull us under. There is a greater understanding, a greater degree of buy-in, a much better understanding of the consequences of failure. When we see the first 4%er, I think we'll have a very sharp focus by a lot of very large organisations, as well as small organisations, it has to be said.
Yes, yeah, I think GDPR has really taken any size of organisation to get their attention.
Oh yes. Money out of the door is always a bad idea for lots of clients.
It is. Now, we're going to run out of time shortly, and we could talk for a lot longer. So I'm going to ask you as my last question. You've been a CISO for a long time.
Long time.
For those who are thinking about it, is it worth it?
I would say yes. It is one of the roles where you can make a difference. You can actually feel that you can go home and feel that you've done something every day, be it mentoring somebody, be it assisting the organisation, working with legal, working with HR, working with finance, getting a feeling of accomplishment. It can do that. It can also be an incredibly frustrating role. So you have to have skin a little thicker than a rhino from time to time. It's always also going to be a role. I mean, the typical lifespan for a CISO in an organisation is around about 2.5 years-ish at the moment, depending on organisations. And if you've got the skill sets, you can be a very attractive pickup. If you've got international experience, you're even more attractive. But it also can be a role that you have to remember to enjoy. If you don't enjoy it, it will eat you alive. Go into it, eyes open, take it for what it is, enjoy what you do, enjoy and work with the people all around you, and it can be an incredibly satisfying and reasonably well remunerated role as well.
Yes, for some, there's some very nice salaries on
I've seen some very nice ones out there. I've also seen one time going, you want to pay that? Well, that's something that
Yes.
you will see as well.
Yes, we see that often, although it's becoming rarer. Yes, people understand the value a little more, particularly in the last couple of years of security and security people.
So yes, be a CISO. It can be nightmarish, but then again, it can be good fun.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming and speaking with me this afternoon.
My pleasure as always.